Mr. Bhaskar Rao, Shrimati Vasanthi, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the Center for Media Studies for inviting me here today morning to reflect upon certain questions which are extremely germane to the growth of the media sector. Before we get down to discussing media education, since Vasanthi ji was telling me that we have people who academically track the media from across the country here to attend this symposium/workshop, I thought I would reflect on some of the larger issues which bedevil the media sector, and I think deserve your consideration, possibly in this workshop or maybe at some other point in time. I think the fundamental ambiguity is with regard to classification. And when I talk about classification, whether media is a business under Article 19(1)(g), or is it any other activity which is entitled to the protection of Article 19(1)(a). I think this fundamental classification is extremely important in determining the standards applicable to instruments of news dissemination or news outlets. And after 67 years of independence, as we meet here today, in the wake of possibly a downsizing or a right-sizing which is taking place in one of the broadcasting platforms. And at a point in time when the wage board recommendations have been taken to the court by the promoters, I cannot but help conclude that it would be fair to say that media is a business, and the rights of the citizen and the rights of the media barons fall in different buckets. The twain are like parallel tracks, perhaps never destined to meet. And that, I think, brings us back to the conundrum which has been bedeviling the Indian media landscape possibly over all these decades. The classical chicken and egg question, in India, do we have the freedom of the press or the freedom of the owner of the press? And that question, unfortunately, has not been answered over all these years. And I do hope that media professionals and especially journalists would seriously introspect and reflect on this question. To my mind, I feel that the question of standards in the media industry is increasingly becoming an issue because we tend to confuse Article 19(1)(g) for Article 19(1)(a). And the reasonable restrictions which caveat 19(1)(g) in terms of 19(6) are sought to be resisted when they are suggested not by government but by even concerned and consensuous stakeholders and watchers of the media space. And when oversight mechanisms or regulatory models are even discussed in the public domain, it is seen as if an assault is being made on the freedom of the press. I think this mindset needs to change because 19.6 contemplates that there should be a reasonable degree of oversight in the interest of the general public at large. As Vasantiji was mentioning, for 5.5 years, I had the occasion of dealing with the front end of the media as the national spokesperson of the Indian National Congress, and for the last 8 months, I've had the good fortune or the misfortune or looking at the back end of the media industry. And what I can discern is that the challenges in the print sector, the challenges in the broadcasting sector, and the challenges in the new media sector are really unique and possibly very distinct, and they require different treatment, for the lack of a better word. Yesterday, I was flying back from Mumbai, and there was a banker sitting next to me. So, a gentleman told me, he works with one of the leading multinational banks. He told me that he's come back to India after 15 years. And he says, 15 years ago when I used to work here, a leading financial daily used to cost 2 rupees. He says, 15 years later, it still costs 2 rupees. I think there is a serious need for the print industry to reflect and rationalize their tariffs, because the print industry globally is under a fair amount of stress. The Washington Post has been the latest casualty in this process. And print numbers globally have been declining. In India, fortunately, they have been flat. In the regional space, they continue to grow. But a very heavily advertisement dependent model possibly is not the most desirable way forward, as Mr. Bhaskar Rao was saying. And there is a need for serious introspection within the print industry as to how far and how further can the advertising model alone continue to sustain them. Similarly, in the broadcasting space, you have 798 news channels now. After we did a rationalization exercise, weeded out some of those who were statutorily non-compliant and recalcitrant. We are down to 798, if I have the figures correctly. Supriyaji would be coming in the afternoon, possibly she'll have the exact, whether it's 797 or it is 799. But as I broadly remember, about 415 of them are news channels. What's happened is that in the name of pluralism, we have completely fragmented the market. And like print, it is hugely advertisement dependent. They have, of course, flawed measurement models, which Mr. Bhaskar Rao was referring to, which all of us grieve over on a 24-hourly basis. And this has led to an addiction to sensationalism, manufactured anger, media trials, and serious issues of violation of privacy, which infringe upon the rights which are guaranteed by Article 21. And that's why we tried to address this when I became the minister on the 29th of October. I had the digitization deadline looming in front of me. 31st of October, digitization in the 4 metros was supposed to be completing itself, the first phase. Frankly, I did not know the D of digitization, but my common sense told me that we needed to stay the course, because if at all my predecessors in Parliament had put some mechanism in place, obviously there must have been some thought which would have gone into it. And 8 months down the line, having done phase 1 and phase 2, and installing 10 million, about 1 crore set-top boxes in the first phase, and another 20 million across 38 cities in phase 2, which is about 3 crore, and we still have another 8 crore set-top boxes to go. The rationale was that it would allow subscriber revenues to start kicking in. It would mitigate carriage. To some extent, it has happened. I don't think, notwithstanding all the complaints and grievances which broadcasters have, bottom lines are definitely looking much better in the August of 2013 than possibly that they did in the October of 2012. But having said that, the full impact of subscriber revenues and the mitigation of carriage costs still has a long way to go. And possibly the entire impact of digitization would really be discernible after we go through phase 3 and phase 4. The reason why I'm saying that is because we have a raging debate, with regard to the 12-minute ad cap. Now, it's absolutely correct that the 12-minute ad cap is a part of the program code. It was put there in 2006. But it is equally true that between 2006 and 2013, when the economy was doing about 8.5% or even 9%, nobody chose to actually enforce it. And now, when the economic numbers are a little slow, primarily because of a lot of volatility in the international economy also, whether it is desirable or advisable to enforce the 12-minute ad cap. Now, the GECs are quite happy to do it because as we speak, the regulator has exercised regulatory forbearance and is allowing channels to do 20 minutes. The GECs are very happy to bring it down to 12 minutes by October. But the news channels, the free-to-air channels, do have a difficulty with it. And I think it would be possibly worth the while of the regulator to seriously look into some of the issues which they have raised and see if they can give them a roadmap, which is synchronous with digitization, so that we can have a seamless implementation of both digitization as well as the statutory remit. The TRAI, in addition to being the protector of the interests of the consumers in the telecom sector, broadcasting was a remit which they got later in 2004. I think also has a responsibility to see that the industrial environment remains stable and conducive to growth, so that you do not have a situation where right sizing or downsizing actually starts becoming the rule rather than the exception across the broadcasting industry. Now, one of the big missed opportunities of digitization as I see it, and this is one of the great regrets that I have, is that when people conceived the entire digitization paradigm, they possibly could have, and with all due respects, I'm not making a value judgment, may perhaps planned it better. Because with 3 million or 30 million set-top boxes having been installed, another 80 million to go, this is a huge missed opportunity for the medium and small scale sector in India. Because a set-top box is not really rocket science. And, giving a $6 to $8 billion worth of business to China, Taiwan, South Korea, and some of the other East Asian countries, I do not know, how sound was the economic rationale of this decision. Often I reflect that could we not held it back, could we not waited till the time the MSME sector could have created capacity in-house, whereby we could have leveraged this digitization opportunity. Because as we speak, I represent a constituency which is the hub of tiny and small scale industry. And I keep telling our guys that, this is a huge opportunity. We still have 8 crore boxes to install across this country. You've been masters of innovation, and we have such centers of innovation around this country, and they should really step up and see as to how they can leverage this opportunity and possibly, turn it into really an India digitization story rather than a digitization story which is being supplanted by technology, hardware and software, which is really coming from abroad. Similarly, if you look at the new media sector, the new media sector has seen exponential growth. If you look at it in terms of valuations, while print valuations are going down, broadcasting valuations are flat, new media valuations are actually, are hitting the roof. And this is because people see an exponential growth in the new media sector. It's 86.7 crore mobile phones, 3.8 crore mobile smartphones, 124 million internet base, which is growing, expected to be about 380 million by 2018. You have, as we speak, 7.1 crore Facebook subscribers, about 1.8 crore people on Twitter. But the new media also has its own issues. The whole issue of anonymity being abused in a manner which is, completely unwarranted and has implications on serious implications on national security. The absence of any global rules of engagement emerging in the short term. And then there are going to be very serious issues of last mile neutrality, because what is going to happen is that when carriage providers are also going to be content providers, how are you going to deal with a situation whereby a carrier provider gets into an exclusive content arrangement with a content provider, or becomes a content provider himself, and then decides to exclude everybody else from that space? So therefore, I think there is a very, very serious need to look at some of the structural and the institutional issues which have been plaguing the media sector and which have gone completely unaddressed over the last 2 decades, as the media sector proliferated and grew exponentially. And at times, I laugh to myself, that the media is possibly its own worst enemy, for the simple reason that when you have such a hugely ad-dependent model, and then you go around talking down the India story. If the India story goes down, GDP goes down. If GDP goes down, the first thing that gets pulled out is advertising. If advertising gets pulled out, you have job losses which take place, and it's a vicious cycle which keeps perpetuating itself. In fact, I advise a lot of people who come to me. I said there is very serious scope to actually open a channel called Happy TV in India, because the amount of gloom and doom, which is unfortunately perpetuated for all the right or the wrong reasons, I do not think ultimately is helping the bottom lines of the media industry itself. So, and all this, conclusively coming to media education after this huge long harangue, obviously impacts standards in terms of both the quality of journalism and obviously the kind of people who are going to be attracted to it. But it is my own feeling, and this is purely a personal view, that even the best journalists would not be able to really help the media industry if these very systemic issues which bedevil its existence are not resolved immediately, or at least in the short term, and the stakeholders have to weigh in very heavily in order to see that there is a multi-partisan effort where all the stakeholders come to the table, be it government, be it media, be it the regulator, to see that we get down to addressing some of these issues. But this does not mean that, in the short term we are going to allow aberrations to go unchecked. Paid news is something which has been flagged by the Election Commission. The Standing Committee on Information and Broadcasting has lambasted us for not doing enough. So therefore, we have gone ahead, and in the amended Press and Registration of Books Act, which is now with the Ministry of Law and Justice, we have made paid news an offence, which I would like to correct myself, has penalties which are laid down, beginning from the first violation to then suspending the license when it comes to the third violation. Similarly, there are issues of private treaties, cross-holdings in the media space. We have a reference which is pending with the TRAI, but media promoters come and tell me that, look, the manner in which this entire media landscape has proliferated, you have to allow horizontal cross holdings across print, broadcasting, and television. There are others who come and tell me that you need to allow actually vertical cross holdings also, because obviously you're not going to have somebody who's in the meat packaging business, come and invest in carriage. It is obviously somebody who is in the media business will come and invest in carriage. But then when I juxtapose that with what is happening in my own state, Punjab, or in Tamil Nadu, where the content carriers, because they are carriage providers also and have the coercive force of the state with them, they have completely excluded everybody else out of the markets. And if that is the model which is going to be duplicated or replicated across the country, with political or partisan interests also weighing in, how much is that going to have an impact or implication on media freedom is something which needs to be very seriously thought through. Then the whole model of regulation. Here itself, last week, we had Justice Markanday Karju, Justice Ravindran, Justice A.P. Shah, and we had a very robust workshop with regard to what should be the structure of media regulation, whether it should be regulation through a statutory process, or it should be self-regulation, or can you marry the two, where you have self-regulation and some element of statutory regulation providing the underpinning. And then, of course, the whole legal architecture around your defamation laws, the need to decriminalize defamation, but at the same time you need to juxtapose it with the emergence of a very, very robust tort, which provides for very expeditious and clearly quantified damages in case somebody's reputation is hurt. And you heard the Supreme Court, even in the Radia case, tell a counsel that every person has a right to reputation which cannot be trampled upon, and jurisprudence cannot be turned on its head. So therefore, I think, this entire gamut of issues needs to then get filtered into the entire discourse on media education. Now, as Mr. Bhaskar Rao was saying, the IIMC, when late Mrs. Indira Gandhi conceived it, was possibly an extremely pioneering idea that we must have an institution which professionally trains media personnel. In fact, I've been telling Suneet that he should start very seriously thinking of running a course which trains people how to run the business of media, because it has become so completely specialized. Think very seriously in terms of whether you can offer a master's degree in business administration on media management itself. And then, of course, you have a lot of private journalism schools, which are doing increasingly good work. I am not someone who debunks the private sector just because it is the private sector. I think, that is the partnership which is going to make India grow. But then, of course, you have all these fly-by-night operators which have proliferated, taking advantage of the exponential growth which has taken place in this industry, which jokingly at times I tell myself has been perhaps the most corrosive legacy of liberalization also. But be that as it may, so I think a good starting point would be that rather than possibly prescribe a curricula which is then standardized across institutions, possibly the media industry could think about at least having a common exam, whereby like you have a bar exam, or you have a medical exam, or you have exams which are conducted by other professional bodies, which then issue a license which enables you to pursue your profession. For example, as a lawyer, I need a license to practice. As a doctor, you need a license to practice. So similarly, I think there may be a case for having a common exam which allows a certain standardization at the apex level to take place, for the simple reason that media draws to itself people who have professionalized in various other spheres. Somebody may have done a doctorate in economics, or somebody may have done a doctorate in international relations, or somebody may have done a doctorate in social sciences, and they work in various sectors of the media, and they are eminently qualified people in their own right. Now, would it be fair to subject people who are so eminently qualified to another exam, which then qualifies them to practice as a media professional? I think they would not really resent it, and it would bring a certain amount of standardization across the entire media space. So, with these words, apologizing for the long harangue on the media sector, I do wish you all the best for your further deliberations. Thank you very much.